Okay, got it.
Okay. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this special session of the eAports webinar series. I'm Julia Marcelino, Membership Experience Lead of the International Association of Port Development, eAports, and I'm thrilled to have you with us today. eAports is a global platform dedicated to fostering innovation, knowledge sharing, and strategic collaboration across the port sector. As the International Association of Port Development, our mission is to connect ports, support their development, and prepare stakeholders to navigate the future of global logistics and maritime trade. This webinar series is one of the tools we use to accomplish our mission, bringing together experts, leaders, and innovators to share insights and practical knowledge. Each session is an opportunity for the global port community to learn, ask questions, and engage in discussions that shape the future of our industry. Today, we are honored to welcome Nicolas Westgate, CCO at Nodal Networks from Canada, speaking today from France. Nick is the founder and chief commercial officer at Nodal, bringing extensive experience in strategic planning and operational excellence. Before starting Nodal, he served as head of planning for Voisey's Bay, one of the world's largest and most complex mining operations, where he led high impact initiatives from concept to execution. In this webinar, Nick will address a challenge that many operations teams face, getting stuck in endless pilots. He will share strategies for defining success right from the start, avoiding the most common pitfalls, and ensuring that promising initiatives progress from testing to real-world application, all without overpromising or losing momentum along the way. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Nick Westgate to start the presentation. The floor is yours, Nick.
Thank you, Julia, and it's really nice to meet you all. I'm clearly in the room with all the VIPs of ports in Brazil, so it's a pleasure to be with all of you. Like a lot of you are already in the innovation space, so part of what you'll hear might sound familiar. I'm going to try to keep this as honest as possible, no self-promotion. That's not what this is about. Really just observations of what's working, what's not working from my perspective as an operator or as a leader of a startup. So yeah, I mean, look, founder of a company called Nodal. I lead the commercial bit of the company today. High level, we're building essentially a virtual data scientist for terminal operations. And we've been doing so pretty much since I quit my last job 2 years ago. Really what I want to focus on today is that the pilot purgatory. Why I chose this topic is because a lot of ports are accelerating towards digitization or digitalization. And as that's happening, more and more ports are going to be turning towards vendors, including startups like my own. And a lot of people are trying to figure out how to make that work. Ports or port authorities, startups, established companies, how do both parties come together, new tech and kind of a bit of the old world? So, I think, some of my early observations is that, you can have a lot of really promising technology out there and talented startups, but then a lot of them will get, stuck in the pilot stage and never move past that point. So as everyone's getting excited about technology and how to bring that into operations for the first time, I'd love to just share my perspective on how to set up for success a new pilot project and try something new. So a bit about my background, and Julia, you already did a great job explaining it. I will also add that I started my career very lucky. So I helped launch one of the first, I guess, innovation groups for the mining industry. It was a digital group for a company called Barrick Gold. It's the biggest gold mining company in the world. And what I was essentially doing is I was both a bit of a project manager and also someone who was essentially scouting startups. So we brought in new exploration technology, and it was mining things, but underground Wi-Fi. We brought in autonomous drilling, a lot of very new to the industry things. And honestly, biggest gold mining company in the world, huge budgets, biggest gold mines. And despite all that, even back then in mining, we struggled to get promising pilots off the ground. With all the money in the world, just couldn't do it. We'd bring in the most cutting edge startups, guys who would win a hackathon, and they would find it very difficult. The reasons were really because of the tech itself, nor the budget, but really about alignment, timing, success criteria, and the messy realities of integrating new technology and minimizing change management, which we weren't very good at doing at the time. And I hope this doesn't end up in the hands of my former colleagues. Now it's like super, super interesting because I was on the side of the scout or project manager, and now I'm on the other side of the table as the startup founder, working with some of my former counterparts to develop pilot projects for operations environments. So a lot of those same lessons I'd seen at the time are very much front and center. And I'll share with you, what some of those lessons are that help increase chances towards long-term agreements without losing momentum. Okay, I'm going to shut up now. Enough about my background. I'd love to kind of talk to you a little bit more about, what those lessons look like. So first and foremost, whether it's AI, it's hardware, it's software, I think what works well enough is never, good enough to go like long term. And so there are really, kind of reflecting on this over the last couple of days, there's really 4 common reasons pilots stall. And as I explain a lot of these pitfalls and lessons, I'm actually going to try to do it from the startup perspective as well as the operator's perspective. So there's sort of lessons learned from both sides. Look, between both parties, what we have in common is that, new technology will not be part of a core workflow. It'll be sort of a side tangential thing, maybe not a priority project. And so no one will ever end up prioritizing that new pilot project. So making sure it's actually aligning with the value chain of an organization is something that's very important. The other one that we've seen a lot is, sort of internal politics and bureaucracy. And oftentimes, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, the bigger the company, the more challenging it can get to start a new technology because you have to get the approval of the high ups, and then, some guy overseas, and then he's away on holidays, but then the budget guy, he's redoing the budget season. I think that can sometimes delay the start of projects, and famously, ports as well as mining have very long sales cycles, and that might be part of it. So that sometimes stalls, the start of pilot projects and how you can go long term with it. The other one, and I'll be the first to admit this, with our first pilot projects, especially as you're still, getting your feet and figuring out like what this product's going to be, and where it's going to draw the most amount of value, your success criteria are way too vague. You'll say like beautiful things like efficiency, like just like these sort of buzzwords, and really to protect both sides, you actually need something far more quantifiable. And without like it being overly quantifiable, that's actually just constraining, but it needs to feel like something that is like a milestone that you hit. And it really protects both sides. Suppose I hit a milestone, and then you can say, well, no, in my mind, you didn't go above and beyond what my expectations were. Then from the startup side, we can progress to something more long-term, and then vice versa. We can keep building for you and say it's done, whereas it didn't really hit your expectations. And then finally, something that both parties can work on is really talking about commercial strategy. The way we now, build our contracts, and something that not a lot of companies or startups do early on, is you actually build your pilot projects so that it turns immediately into something more long-term, unless you don't hit the success criteria. The default becomes POC and then a long-term agreement, not POC, and then we can talk about it and have a couple meetings and have more brainstorming. It is the long-term engagement, and there is a way out early days. And that means that you essentially avoid weeks and weeks of conversations between the two things, and you don't have a loss of momentum, which is really important for new projects. So those are essentially the realities of essentially doing a tough tech venture or business, essentially building technology for operations environments. A couple misconceptions that you hear based on what I've just said is that if the pilot works, rollout will be automatic. If your agreement doesn't say so, it doesn't necessarily mean that. Just be really careful. Like, I think a lot of startups will go all out. And then there's, a period where maybe there's staffing change or new priorities. Get those priorities aligned early days. Super important. And of course, part of what I'll be discussing today is that some of those priorities and discussions can happen a little bit along the way, but don't wait until it's the very last second before you have those conversations. Big names sometimes are better. That's a misconception. Sometimes bigger partners can be a tougher place for startups to start. You guys have heard this before, and I'll talk about that in not too long. We'll figure out integration later. No problem, just send us the data. Yes and no. I think there's some data security issues. A lot of terminals are actually using in-house software. The amount of times I'm like opening up a new software and it's like, oh boom, French, oh boom, Spanish, oh boom, and you're kind of translating these columns and you're just like wondering, what am I even looking at? So I would not underappreciate the importance of talking about integration early on. Even if you don't plan on doing that integration, just get a preview like what's to come and start having those conversations early. Oh my God, trust me, it will save so much time on both parties to start talking about integration in early days. And ops will adopt it if leadership says so. I'll be the first to admit I did not do this well when I was in the mining industry. I was working very much on the leadership side at corporate headquarters in Toronto, and we had this, we had an exciting mandate, and we would go to the operations and say, hey, I have an exciting startup. It's going to do blah. Let's say it's VR goggles. By the way, in case you guys are doing VR goggles, I think they were very cool. But I think at the time, you're bringing cool technology just because leadership wants it doesn't mean that ops will buy into it, and then your project will come to a grinding halt. So make sure that in all conversations, you always bring in operations folks who are on the ground, who would actually benefit from a product like this. So common misconceptions. I think that, there's essentially a couple different things you can do in terms of designing pilot projects well early days. So I think it's about coming up with milestones early on. And again, it's really about protecting yourself. So, typically on our side, we do, 3 months and we'll do a milestone once a month. Did we get, let's say, do we get data on board? 2, did we do, a controlled testing period? And then 3, did this deliver the success criteria that we said we would go after? Again, it's really about bite-sizing this thing. And it's not just so much for the startup, but it's really about also getting internal buy-in. I think for a lot of terminals, and I was actually just talking to a group not too long ago, a couple hours ago, they're going through this process for the very first time. They're trying to figure out how to do technology. In mining, we did this all the time. Reality is operations leaders, they don't want to take the big risk on trying something new. They approve the budget for it. They approve the time. No one in operations has time. Everyone's working like crazy. There's no resources for it. So no one really wants to have, excuse my French, I'm in France. No one wants to have their ass on the line for taking too big of a risk and going we're going to do a 3-month thing, we're going to do a 15-month thing, break it up into milestones with clear exit points. I think it really de-risks and becomes a favor for everybody. I think in terms of also options thinking, so when you do hit those milestones, is there a point where you can either pivot, you can exit, you can stop? I think those are part of the conversations you'd have early days. Of course, most startups will be like, oh, this is a nightmare. How can you suggest something like this? But I do think it helps get to the yes. And in reality, a lot of folks in our industry and also my previous industry, they struggle to get to the yes because they feel they will get locked into this long project that will cost a lot of money, take a lot of time. And so I think it's about addressing some of those concerns, which, fair enough, leaders of operations have regarding these projects taking so long. There is a graveyard of startups that have claimed they will take AI, give us the data, we'll put it in a black box, we'll shake it around a little bit, and then we'll tell you exactly how to do your job. It will take 1 year to do that. It will cost way too much money, and then it will, at some point, underdeliver. I think that was one of the learnings from a lot of top AI companies from the last decade, not even just in our industry but just in general. It's how do you meet the customer with where it's at and actually match more with their workflows and their day-to-day is, rather than just tell them what to do and take forever to get there. And then finally, and this is what I've spoken about before, it's really about having a contract that, if the success criteria are met, turns into something long-term. I think that, I think as operations leader, you want this to succeed. That's why you did the pilot project. The startup wants this to go through long-term. They want to see that this can go long, but there needs to be a clear exit and way to get protected. as a startup, perhaps I'm working with a partner that turns out to not be a good partner, taking too much time. Data isn't good. Maybe there are IP issues. I want to feel like I'm also protected and I can get out of it. You'd be surprised. There's some terminal groups out there that are not very forthcoming with how they would protect a startup's technology. So I think it's a nice place to potentially exit, and that's not a bad outcome. I think both sides have learned along the way, and that's okay. So definitely bake that into the contract. In terms of picking the actual pilot project, this is the next section, and this is the big one. There's two things I want to talk about here. I want to talk about picking the right scope of what to do and picking the right partner. So in terms of what to do, have you guys ever heard of like beachhead or base camp mindsets? Like anyone, maybe yes or no? Michael, so you're nodding. Maybe you can rock through this section. Actually, it sounds like So beachhead, base camp, look, high level, the way to think about it is beachhead is what is the use case that you're going to go after. I think a lot of technology companies claim that they can do everything under the sun. I think it's very tempting. Really hone in on a use case and get buy-in from not only leadership, but also operations team. Everyone loves it. Everyone is comfortable talking about it. And it's obvious in its value and it's measurable in terms of success criteria. Might seem obvious. It's just a really good reminder. I want to emphasize that that's the thing that we even got wrong early days. We're going to build an agentic system for you and we'll do everything you want. No, it doesn't really work like that. You really got to turn these use cases into something that directly impacts an ROI. So thought I would talk about that and where beachhead comes from. I could be wrong. But beachhead, I think, comes from some World War II terms, which is if I'm going to arrive at this beach, where do I arrive? And I want to take a strip, literally just a narrow strip where I essentially I set up and then I expand into the beach. Base camp, very similar, but instead of thinking about it from market or use case or features, think about it from the technology side. And that's actually a little bit more of an internal discussion. What data sources are we going to work with? Are we going to pull in Navis, TideWorks? Are we going to pull in IBM Maximo? I don't know what systems you guys use, but as a group, we need to have that discussion. What are we going to be working with? Is an Excel sheet that's totally in Portuguese and where it's too difficult for us to work with? For instance, so in terms of base camp, it's about also aligning what those milestones are from a technology perspective and starting small. And once you've hit those milestones and shown you can get there, internally you take on more scope. High level, beachhead, really hone in on use case. Base camp, really narrow in on technologically, what are you going to do that doesn't feel unfair to your team, your engineering team, in terms of what you've committed. I'm the commercial guy. I'm the sales guy for the company. I've been in sales for not very long. My background is very much engineering, kind of civil engineering. And, I think the classic thing that commercial people could do is they can kind of promise to customers, we'll do it all. And I don't think that ends up being fair for anybody, especially the engineering team, especially if that means they work 100 hours a week under high stress, and then you end up under delivering and not having a good pilot project. So very, very good reminders to always start small and then you can add wins afterwards. Choosing the right partner. All right, this is the one that I really love. So from the operator's perspective, so if you work at a terminal, look, I wouldn't really focus necessarily on brand names. This goes both ways. I think things you should be looking for, obviously technical competence is really important, but the big one is willingness to adapt to your current workflows. Meeting you with where you're at. Do not work with a startup that will promise you the world and not make an effort to understand how you are ready to do your job and minimize how much of your job you have to change. Technology is just not going to work in this space if it requires you to change all your current systems. No way. I'll speak to Canada. Most guys who work in terminal operations are above the age of 50, right? And so it's not so obvious how to work with iPads for the first time and log in, all these new ways of logging information. I really think technology should be built around what's already existing rather than try to replace it. Can't emphasize that enough. I think there needs to be a cultural fit. beware of maybe a group, like a startup group, for instance, that seems too tech driven. As engineers, I think like half of you guys on the call are engineers. I think a lot of port leaders were probably like an industrial engineer, a civil engineer at some point. I think we have a tendency to want to like over engineer and go hard on, how cool a solution can be. I think technology tends to fail when people don't really jive with their customer base. I remember I brought this young group that won a hackathon in Toronto, and like I bring them to like a mine site in Nevada, and like just envision like like the dorkiest gang, and they're brilliant, and you bring them these sort of tough operators, and it just wasn't working. Like immediately the operators had sort of like mentally like decided to block them out because they didn't take this group seriously. So I think the ability to sort of like talk and vibe well with the operations team, it's not something that is spoken about enough, but certainly for our space, I think goes a really long way to like getting to even a point where you can shadow some of the guys. Oh, we're gonna walk the yard. Do you mind if I follow you? I mean, I've done it 12 times already, but like I want to see how you're doing your job. I think that bit is not spoken enough of in our industry, especially because it's such a people industry already. Like you got to get that people bit figured out. So cultural bit, willingness to adapt to workflows, as well as technical competence. Those are the things that I would say are either green flags or red flags if they're missing. Okay, so in terms of the startup perspective, always partner with terminals that are in Brazil because they are obviously the best terminals to work with, and you'll be set. No, I'm just kidding. So the right partner isn't always the biggest terminal in the region, especially if you're a bit of a younger group. And there's 4 reasons why we say so. So first of all, smaller teams, less bureaucracy and red tape when it comes to approvals, shorter decision cycle, so it's not 6 months, and then when you get the data, you don't have to wait a couple of weeks for it to get exported. You tend to have those decisions, or the throughput of decisions is a lot higher. The other bit is you tend to want to also look for above average technical maturity. That is probably the most nebulous piece of advice I'll give you today. I think we've had the privilege of working with terminals on like all ends of the spectrum, ones that have the nice data lake, data warehouse, that have all the most modern tooling, and then those who operate everything with Excel sheets. And in reality, and I'll get to this, like you don't want to replace Excel sheets because that's one of those things that we'll never replace. Like Excel sheets are going nowhere. They're just too foundational for how people run operations. But I think it's, an operation that's only Excel sheets in the early days of a startup can feel difficult, like when you're working with like 100 different files and stuff. So I think it's about like being very choosy and thoughtful with who your partners are going to be so that you don't end up taking a year to deliver on a pilot project. And then, of course, in the last bit, and I keep talking about it, so forgive me, it's really finding a partner that has the intention of going long-term with you. I actually pitched a terminal maybe about a month ago that said, we would love to do a pilot project with you, but nothing past the 3 months because we actually haven't done like, the right setup with the right API connections to go long-term with you, but we'll do 3 months. And like from our perspective, like it sounds nice because I think early days you want a customer, but you really will have to be thoughtful with like where you're putting your resources. So there's an opportunity cost. This probably sounds like an obvious conclusion, but really try to find someone that wants to go the distance with you, and that will go a really long way. So younger companies typically often go for more medium-sized terminal groups tend to be really helpful. I think there's really 2 more points I want to bring up with you guys, and then I'll turn over to you guys for questions. The first is map checks. So think about like a POC in the early days is like trying to cross the ocean with a boat, and you're trying to use like the kind of the stars to navigate you, and like you constantly need to course correct. If you were to just go in one direction, and you're trying to head for I don't know, across the ocean, you might end up in a very different location unless you're course correcting. And course correcting is super, super normal, very, very, very healthy. not even on your technology, but just on like the scope of the pilot project. So just good to have that conversation all the time. In terms of what we did early days, only because we know our product was infinitely mature in those early days, we actually asked for a bi-weekly where we were going to present what we built, and really have our customers grill us. What does this mean? Why is this important? Roast us literally on this technology. Tell us why it's not good. That's really, really valuable, rather than me go away for 3 months and come back and go, ta-da, and it's like all duct taped together, barely holding on. I think, having those like natural course correction moments are great. And it just saves a lot of headaches and actually allows you to have a lot more velocity. People talk about speed. Yeah, not to be cheesy about it, but I think we try to talk about speed and direction, which gives you more velocity. So make sure you're always going in the right direction. So map checks are good. If you are, as terminal leaders here on the call or port leaders, do ask your startup to provide you updates every 2 weeks. Don't let them go off. Fight their tendency to go off for too long and then come back to you with like the surprise that is actually just a Frankenstein. Yeah, those are sort of my thoughts. In terms of my last bit that I want to talk about with you all today is around change management. To be totally transparent with you guys, we did our first completion of a pilot project at the very beginning of June. And then since then, there's been 2 others. It's been a really busy summer. We weren't good the first time we did it. Okay. And I think that we had this vision of, delivering an agentic system, and it was kind of like a little bit too advanced and not really like specific on like who would be using it and one of the like the use cases to go after. So everything, by the way, I've spoken about today, definitely felt it firsthand. And I think a lot of what doesn't get spoken about enough is the importance of change management. I'll give you a stat I really love. Projects with excellent change management processes are 6 times more likely to meet or exceed objectives and turn into a long-term success than those that don't. And so part of your product design and POC design really needs to be about how do you manage change? Who do you bring on? When do you train them? What are the manuals that they need to go after? Then who's the next person that comes on, and then what do they use? And if they have any questions, and the third person, the fourth person, like you really got to have those conversations early days, and put that as part of a core part of your POC. Otherwise, you'll have this moment where it's like, ta-da, and then like everyone around the room looks at each other going like, well, are you gonna use this, or are you gonna use this first? And you don't want that. You want people to know like who's the first person to use it, and be so excited that like they're going to use it for this specific reason early days. So if I were to recap a little bit of a little bit of everything I've said, I think a framework that works for us is start small in terms of beachhead, so use case, and base camp in terms of technology that you think you can actually deliver on. Try to embed yourself into something that's a little bit more daily, an actual priority for the organization. Train in context, so there needs to be good cultural alignment. So spend time actually meeting the teams, understand how they work, whether it's software or even hardware, like just meet the team and really get to know them and how they work. Then when you get to those milestone points, which for us was once a month, but I understand that bigger projects might be further in between, have those milestones and share the wins. Share that you're ahead of schedule, a little bit behind, and explain very frankly why you're behind and where you need help. And that will help you effectively scale with momentum. The last bit I'll talk about here is making sure that you align with the right champions in your organization. This bit you've heard of before, but know who you're building for. Know who's going to be a tester. So who's going to be your sponsor? It could be the CEO. I mean, I'm trying to think about, we've had a sponsor that I wasn't even really working at the company anymore. Look, it doesn't have to be like a clear answer. Like it's just, you need to have an executive sponsor. You need to have a middle management person that's going to make sure that this continues to be a priority. And then finally, someone who's going to be testing all the time. Like who's your actual end user? And for us, early days, we weren't sure who our end user was. And it was kind of a bit of a frustrating point for us because like 1 month is this guy, the next month is this guy, and they were both giving us conflicting pieces of feedback, and we just couldn't invest in the product. So just make sure that like you really hone in like who's actually going to be testing this thing, who's going to be sponsoring it, making sure it's a priority. So look, I mean, those are some of my highlights from building software, specifically artificial intelligence in the space for the last year, having completed 3 pilot projects now so far, and in the middle of kicking off a 4th. So it's been at times painful, but I think there are some core principles that will stand the test of time. And we're already starting to see that like our process is a lot better, and people tend to be happier with it. But like I do think that like there's some things that are very specific and unique to our industry that need to be acknowledged. So those are my thoughts on pilot purgatories and how to introduce new tech into the port space. So thank you all for listening, and love to hear if you have any thoughts or want to push back on anything I've said.
Good, Nick. Good to hear from your thoughts about beachhead and use case concept. We're just in the last phase of a pilot project here, and we saw a lot of expectations going all around because that's a huge tool with several features, and people are not sure about what could be enough for the evaluation to be properly finished, properly completed. So as you talk about it, I'm thinking about how to deal with the scenario. And when you have a focus two, you could nail down exactly which result you want to put on trial. Maybe it's easier. Maybe it's easier to manage expectations. I'm not sure about change management because I see that in further developments. But good to hear from this experience. I was just thinking about this and this morning, evaluating a trial here.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, like what you're saying is the experience we're hearing from everybody, and where we were, weak in the early days as well. You almost want to break this up into almost like boring steps. Like everyone wants to talk about how they can build a rocket. Just focus on the rocket engine. All right, if we can get the rocket engine, we'll talk about the launch pad. So I think that tends to increase chances of projects succeeding. But thanks for sharing.
Good, thanks.
Anyone else?
Thank you, Nick, for your presentation. Well, Michael?
Oh, hey, Nick, thanks. I think the comments on the importance of change management were extremely relevant. And I hear that a lot, actually, with regard to technology investments. A lot of times it kind of gets overlooked, and it makes the whole entire path a lot more difficult. And when I hear about successes, the whole change management change management conversation is something that it happens in the beginning. And it's kind of top-down, leadership-driven kind of stuff. So that's a great point. My question for you, Nick, is when you're talking about implementations that are successful, I'm imagining that a lot of times you're talking about conversations with the operations team. And when do you think it's appropriate for the IT team to be part of that conversation? Does that happen from day one, or does it happen day 2, or what's your feedback as far as the most successful implementations regarding when IT is involved?
I love that. Such a good question. And I think there's been a lot of different ways we've gone about it. We've done leadership, then sort of bottom up, then IT last second. Oftentimes my reflection is that ITs get sent to, sort of the back, they're sort of just given a project and they have to deal with it. But then they're also working with 30 other projects. And it's not really fair for them. I like to bring them on early days, as early as possible, and get them involved in the conversation. And actually, before even kicking off projects, we have our engineers meet IT teams before, like weeks before, to actually talk about how we'll get started. Not after the kickoff, and it's like, oh, we can't get this to you. Oh, there's like an issue with this, way before, as early as possible. We actually even get sometimes even the data transfers before the kickoff, just so that we even know what we're working with. But IT teams, they have to not be just drop this project on their lap among 30 other projects that they have to go. They have to be at the forefront of what can happen, and what they have capacity to handle, and what they can actually provide you. Some companies, they don't have the ability to provide APIs to startups. And like leadership's like, oh yeah, we'll work with like so-and-so, it'll be so easy. No, there's no APIs. There's security policy that prevents that from happening. So having that conversation earlier on to find those blockers, very useful. Yeah.
Okay, Raquel.
Hey, Nick.
Hey.
My question to you is related to that critical transitional period that you mentioned. So you mentioned a couple of things that a company, a startup can do just to actually predict that there will actually be a big contract in the end of the POC. Can you actually either do a deep dive or be a little bit more granular with regards to that transition, like what needs to be negotiated, like even ahead you start a POC, or like just like in that transition period, what else can be done? I know Rogério mentioned a little bit on that process that they're at right now, and that can be quite painful. Can you be a little bit more granular on that specific transition of what can we do to actually either fast track that decision of hiring for a bigger contract, or I don't know, maybe some policies or best practices, whatever you can provide as an insight.
Absolutely. And I'm going to answer this question in two ways. Raw, I told you it was going to be the very honest truth of what it was like in the early.
Good to see that map. That shows some reasonable steps on starting simple. That nice. Good to see you have that map.
Yeah, of course. Great. Well, I appreciate the questions, you two. Does anyone else have any questions?
No.
Great.
I'm good. I'm thinking about the pain you evoke in all of this.
It is painful
good.
until you get it done a couple times, then it gets a little bit better. But the first few times, it's it's good. Grow.
Yeah, good to see. How did you structure your pilots in that slide you presented? That's a good approach. You have clearly stated transitions, who needs to agree on which points, and you go slowly to more complex scenarios.
Absolutely. And it becomes, and even us having that framework in our minds makes it so much easier for us to sign new customers now. Like we can have that and we inspire confidence because we've been through that process. So it's actually never been easier to now like kind of approach some of these deals because we have done it. But like you have to go through that process. And I think people should be more honest with sharing just like what is really unique about this industry and how to make new tech adoption work.
Yeah, and not everyone thinks the same about the initiative. So it's hard to equalize this.
Yeah, of course.
So good to hear our thoughts on this, Nick.
Of course. Great. Anyone else?
No, I'm good. Thank you for the presentation.
Well, let me ask you, actually, I'll ask the group this. What have you guys found works really well to go between the pilot and the long term? Like I just shared one perspective. Love to hear from you guys, best practices.
Just move ahead from pilot to long term. Just keep it going.
Keep it going.
Yeah, I like when it happened that way. Because, you mobilize a lot of people. You have to think over that stuff. You have to make it work, steer it properly. Then you have something that looks good. Just keep it going. I think pilot is like a prototype in development approach. You try in small scale, a beachhead, like I mentioned, then go further on and keep it working.
Do whatever you can to compress that period, to end all this momentum. Cool. Anyone else? Michael, Esteban, Aldo, I'd love to hear from you guys if you found something that works great. Michael.
Yeah. It's interesting because I spend a lot of time talking to ports and terminals here in Brazil, and it's really changed quite a bit when you talk about technology investments in the last, I'd say 10 years, maybe less, as far as who's involved in the decision making, who's involved in the project planning, who's involved in the implementation. And there's still a considerable gap between, let's say, the early adopters / market leaders and the ports and terminals that still see their core business as cargo movement.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. The leaders and the early adopters, they're bringing the IT folks in from day one or earlier. And the IT professionals at the leaders in the port industry in Brazil are strategic professionals within the organization, because they understand that it's technology is a commodity. Everyone has money to invest in technology, but how to invest, where to invest, where to apply technology, like artificial intelligence. Yeah, we're going to use it, but where, how? How are we using artificial intelligence as a competitive advantage in a strategic sense as far as our business results? Those are the kind of questions that the leaders are asking. And we still have ports and terminals that are very, let's say, steel oriented. They're moving containers. So it's really cool to see this evolution. And even in the last 2 years, I've seen a tremendous evolution as far as the willingness to invest in technology to gain significant visibility in the operations. So, I've had a lot of conversations, even in the last couple of months, about the whole transformational power of data as a support for decision making, which I don't remember having that kind of conversation 5-6 years ago. So it's really cool to see how the port industry in Brazil is kind of taking the horse by the reins, the bull by the reins, or whatever that expression is. I don't remember now. But it's a very exciting thing to see, because IT professionals are just, and we're seeing data science teams now showing up in hierarchies. We're seeing innovation teams showing up in the hierarchies. We're seeing a lot of movement within the structure of the organization within the port industry to support investments in technology innovation, which is awesome.
Yeah. And I'll quickly add to that. There is a line that my CTO likes to use: data rich, insight poor. And this is directly to what you were saying, Michael. For a lot of years, we haven't had the data. Now we have the data, and it's like, how do you turn that into almost like commoditized intelligence? That's really more my realm. As you can tell, in an artificial intelligence, but it's really about the empowerment of people in ports today. And for a long time, it's been tricky to figure out how to do that well, and make data approachable and intuitive. It's kind of felt like something sort of off to the side. So yeah, that's part of the change management piece, is how do you make this feel like intelligence for everybody and turn that data into insights across the organization? So appreciate the comment on that, Michael. And looking forward to meeting you in person. Actually, I know you guys are talking about the upcoming conference, I think in October. Yes, in October 13th or something like that.
First and second of October.
1st and 2nd of October.
Saramba is going to be with us as well.
Who's going to be? Oh, Saran's going to be. Nice.
Yeah. Well, I will be there. Yeah.
Sweet,
Fine, just
sweet.
talk to me to be part of a panel. So
Yeah.
let's talk together there.
Amazing. I'd love to be on a panel with you.
Yeah, and our partnership with Ports is very strategic and very important for the port industry. So when you're able to come down, Nick, it'd be great to connect with you.
Say less. I'm pretty easily convinced. I think it'd be a good time for me to come down now. Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for joining. It's an hour out of your day. I know you guys are all super busy, but appreciate you joining and listening to, my perspective as a startup entering this industry, some of the lessons learned, and how that's actually turned into a big enabler for us now. So
thank you, Nick. And we have a lot of stuff to share about this. The pains everywhere. So
yeah.
Lots of work to do.
Of course.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you everyone else for coming. Does anyone else have anything else to add to this discussion?
Thank you for this meeting, Julia and Raquel.
You're most welcome. So before we close, we'd like to invite you to join the Ports online investment round that's taking place on September 16th, 17th, and 18th via Zoom and Microsoft Teams. This global event will connect port authorities, terminal operators, investors, and development finance institutions to explore concrete opportunities in the port sector. So on September 16th, we'll kick off with the Global Port Investment Opportunities Overview, which is going to be a live broadcast featuring presentations of port infrastructure projects and available credit lines from all over the world. Then on September 17th and 18th, we'll host virtual matchmaking sessions, giving project owners and investors the chance to meet one-on-one and explore potential collaboration. So yeah, I'm going to add the link on the chat in case you would like to see more details of this event. And just as a reminder, Ports is opening its membership season on September 1st. So we warmly welcome all port leaders, professionals, and stakeholders to be part of this growing global community. By becoming a member, you have access to exclusive content, strategic networking, and impactful initiatives like this webinar series. Together, we are shaping the future of ports. Ports, connecting ports, navigating the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for